Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In all the scandals and crises that have hit the short but tumultuous presidency of Donald Trump, the admission by his former lawyer over hush money paid out of campaign funds is the biggest and the most threatening by far. Basically, it appears to implicate the president in criminal behaviour. His former lawyer, Michael Cohen, said he had paid off 2 women and on the direction of candidate Trump. Tonight, the president said if he had used campaign funds, that could have been a little dicey, as he put it, but he hadn't. It was his own money. That's all right, then. It is, of course, a long way from being implicated to being impeached, the political process to remove a president. But the word has been used seriously today on Capitol Hill, and arguably for the first time. It is out there.
If Donald Trump is sensing that his presidency is in any way endangered, his doubts were well disguised. Just over an hour ago, he supervised one of the most revered ceremonies in American life, as he posthumously awarded the country's highest military honor to the widow of a fallen Air Force hero.
John Chapman was the first to charge up the mountain toward the enemy.
No discussion here of the courtroom events of nearly 24 hours ago that have placed his White House perhaps under the greatest pressure since Watergate. Michael Cohen was once the president's personal lawyer and fixer, the keeper of the secrets. And yet last night, he told a judge that Trump was a co-conspirator in the payment of money to influence the 2016 election campaign. According to Cohen, money was paid to 2 women, to Karen McDougal and to the actress Stormy Daniels, to buy their silence. Cohen's lawyer told me today that Trump was both complicit and culpable.
There is no question the President of the United States committed a crime. He approved and signed the checks, and having known about and being complicit in a crime means you are guilty of the crime. We have a President of the United States. If it weren't for the fact that he was president, he'd be subject to indictment, conviction, and imprisonment.
Does Michael Cohen regard the president as a criminal and as corrupt?
Yes.
Back in April, Trump said he knew nothing about hush money paid to Stormy Daniels.
President, did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels? No. Then why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no truth or allegation?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's my attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael.
This evening, the president walked a new and very fine line, telling Fox News that yes, he belatedly knew of the payments, but that he used his funds, not a campaign account, to reimburse Cohen.
My first question when I heard about it was, did they come out of the campaign? Because that could be a little dicey. And they didn't come out of the campaign, and that's big. But they weren't, it's not even a campaign violation. If you
He then reverted to an attack on his media critics, and one newspaper in particular.
The New York Times cannot write a good story about me. They're crazed. They're like lunatics.
And this afternoon, the White House repeatedly clung to an even simpler defense.
The president in this matter has done nothing wrong. He did nothing wrong. He did nothing wrong. He did nothing wrong. The president has done nothing wrong.
At the same time as the Cohen drama was playing out, a jury convicted Paul Manafort, his former campaign chief, on tax and bank fraud. And to that news, Trump last night reacted with anger, saying Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor probing Russian collusion, was out of all control.
This has nothing to do with Russian collusion. This started as Russian collusion. This has absolutely nothing to do. This is a witch hunt, and it's a disgrace.
The question now is how Congress will react. No surprise that Democrats smell blood.
We're in a Watergate moment. The White House increasingly is looking like a criminal enterprise, literally.
What's wrong here? This is the most corrupt presidential administration in living history.
It leaves Republicans braced for further legal and political setbacks.
I've got faith in the judicial system, and this will work its way out. I'm sure there's going to be other revelations.
The president last night took comfort in a rally in West Virginia. The loyalty of his core supporters appears intact.
We are now the greatest economy that we have ever had. We're the greatest economy in the world.
On his return to Washington after that performance, he looked understandably weary. Assailed by his critics, under continuing and intense scrutiny by Mueller's investigators, deserted by some in his inner circle, Trump's fate is not sealed, but he is certainly in mounting political peril.
Well, impeachment is a political rather than a criminal process, and for Mr. Trump to be successfully impeached, members of Congress in effect need to vote him out. At this precise moment, it is hard to see that happening, but if it did, here is how. Under the US Constitution, there are 3 impeachable offences of treason, bribery, and the more opaque, and you might say political, high crimes and misdemeanours. The House of Representatives, which is currently, of course, controlled by Trump's Republican Party, would have to accuse the president of one of those crimes. They essentially would act as the prosecution. Any action requires majority support from the House, so there would either have to be a significant Republican revolt or impeachment proceedings could be triggered after November's midterm elections if the Democrats regain control. The last president to be impeached in this way was Bill Clinton. He was accused of obstructing justice by lying under oath about his sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky. But Clinton was found not guilty in the end in the Senate. So senators would essentially act as judge and jury on any Trump impeachment, and here there is a higher bar of a 2/3 majority. But if, and of course it's a big if, carried in the Senate, the 45th president would be the first to be thrown out of office in this way. Nixon, of course, resigned before he could be impeached, and Vice President Mike Pence would be installed in the White House until 2020. Well, let's go back to Robert Moore in Washington. Robert, as we were just going through there, it's a long way to impeachment. His opponents really have got quite a battle still, haven't they?
Yeah, it's very notable, Tom, that for all the legal dramas of the last 24 hours, very few people here on Capitol Hill are using the I word. I mean, impeachment is regarded in this country as something of a national political trauma, not to be invoked lightly. Even the president's fiercest critics like Elizabeth Warren say that first all of the facts must be gathered and uncovered. I think 2 factors need to come into play before it becomes a serious possibility. Firstly, and most obviously, Robert Mueller needs to, and his investigators need to deliver his report to the House Judiciary Committee here, and they need to have found a smoking gun, something that link Trump associates with Kremlin agents, or at the minimum establishes some widespread and substantial criminality within the Trump election campaign. And then secondly, you know, we are just 75 days away now from congressional midterm elections. Democrats need to seize control of both the House and the Senate if it's realistic that a Republican president is going to be impeached. I mean, that said, though, it is true that if criminality is discovered, there's no strictly legal outcome. I mean, according to Department of Justice guidelines, a sitting president cannot be charged with a crime. So political judgment, in other words, impeachment, does go onto the table. But the key point, perhaps, is that many Democrats you speak to recognize that the deep political rifts in America can only be healed, really, by an election, that impeachment is in danger only of exacerbating those very divisions.
OK, Robert, it's going to be a fascinating autumn, but for now, thank you.
The US is in the midst of a frenzy of excitable commentary and speculation about just how likely it is that President Trump may be engulfed by the implications of the criminal trials of his former close collaborators and confidants. Already, it seems his presidency may be distracted by the constant news feed of allegation and embarrassment, but that, of course, he can deal with in the usual way, appealing to his base through well-placed tweets. But the legal system is harder to dismiss. So, here is where we are today. Mr. Trump is directly implicated by his old lawyer, Michael Cohen, in an election funding crime because of undisclosed hush money paid to women claiming they had affairs with him. Could that crime bring a president down? Doubtful. But still, Mr. Trump went on Fox News to answer that charge that his campaign had paid the women to shut up.
Did they come out of the campaign? They didn't come out of the campaign. They came from me, and I tweeted about it. You know, I don't know if you know, but I tweeted about the payments. But They didn't come out of campaign. In fact, my first question when I heard about it was, did they come out of the campaign? Because that could be a little dicey.
So that's him on the specific crime he's implicated in. Talking of dicey, it is worth reminding ourselves of what President Trump had said about those payments when they surfaced back in April. He was on his plane, asked about it by journalists.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels?
No.
Why did Michael Cohen make it if there was no truth to allegations?
Well, you have to ask Michael Cohen. Michael's an attorney, and you'll have to ask Michael Cohen.
Well, that's all the Stormy Daniels stuff. But in fact, what's potentially more explosive is what Michael Cohen might know about Russia, election interference and possible Trump campaign collusion. We'll hear from Michael Cohen's lawyer on what he knows in a moment. But first, the BBC's Paul Wood, who's been specifically following the allegations against the president since he took office.
Almost heaven, West Virginia.
Donald Trump's Twitter feed was oddly silent as news came that his former campaign manager and his former lawyer were going to jail. This was virtually a catatonic state for a president who tweets reflexively about everything. Instead, he slipped into a warm bath of affirmation at a rally in West Virginia. This was perhaps therapy for a troubled president.
Fake news and the Russian witch hunt. We got a whole big combination. Where is the collusion? You know, they're still looking for collusion. Where is the collusion? Find some collusion. We want to find the collusion.
Fake news, the deep state conspiracy. The old slogans may continue to play well with loyal supporters, but the president is facing a relentless legal process. 5 of Trump's associates have now admitted to crimes or have been convicted. Paul Manafort, his campaign manager, Rick Gates, Manafort's deputy, Michael Cohen, Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Flynn, his national security advisor, and George Papadopoulos, a campaign aide. Manafort is the only one of the 5 who hasn't rolled over. He rejected a plea deal.
Paul Manafort's a good man. This has nothing to do with Russian collusion.
On the face of it, President Trump is right. Manafort's tax fraud predates the campaign. But if the Russians knew about it, would they have had a hold over Trump's campaign manager?
I think that what we saw in the evidence that convicted Manafort was the compromising material that the Russians have on Manafort. And they have a great deal more about his offshore accounts as well as his personal behavior. Manafort is a Russian asset, and he is also compromised. The Russians have compromised on him.
The president will be far more worried about Michael Cohen, for years the keeper of his most important secrets. Cohen was Trump's fixer and bagman. He paid off models and porn stars. He told troublesome journalists where to get off.
So I'm warning you, tread very lightly, because what I'm going to do to you is going to be disgusting. Do you understand me?
No one in America will be shocked if Donald Trump slept with a porn star or 2. But the hush money was paid just before the election. Cohen's indictment says this was an illegal campaign contribution done at the request of the candidate. But what Cohen may know about Russia will be of far more interest to the special prosecutor. The former MI6 officer Christopher Steele wrote in his dossier that during the election campaign, Michael Cohen went to Prague to meet Russian officials. Cohen's always vehemently denied that, tweeting a picture of his passport for emphasis. Some American media reports say Robert Mueller has evidence to the contrary. And one source in the intelligence community told me there was an electronic trail that put Cohen in Prague. There's no corroboration of that claim, but if true, this is the collusion that President Trump's enemies have long imagined. This is what the special counsel will want Michael Cohen to talk about. Cohen also knows about an interesting meeting in Trump Tower during the campaign. Donald Trump Jr. sat down with a lawyer from the Kremlin who'd promised dirt on Hillary Clinton. "I love it," Jr. had said, perhaps unwisely, in an email.
Mr. Cohen has knowledge on certain subjects that should be of interest to the special counsel knowledge about the computer crime of hacking and whether or not Mr. Trump knew ahead of time about that crime and even cheered it on.
I was pretty stunned by what Lanny Davis had to say. He's addressed the issue of whether there was foreknowledge of hacking or contemporaneous knowledge, or the hacking was urged or supported by anyone. He was clearly referring to Trump, and that goes straight to, that goes straight to the heart of whether there was a criminal conspiracy to violate U.S. election laws in 2016 by Donald Trump and his campaign.
One former Trump campaign aide told me we couldn't even coordinate with the RNC in Pennsylvania, let alone with Russian intelligence. But if there was not exactly a highly organised conspiracy, that does leave open the possibility of collusion. That's what Cohen's lawyer hints at when he claims the president may have known ahead of time of Russian hacking. Trump has never been in such serious trouble. His presidency may now hang on what Michael Cohen has to say.
Paul Wood there. Well, the man of the moment is Michael Cohen, who's not available for interviews, but we did get hold of his lawyer, Lanny Davis, who you saw a brief clip of in Paul's report. I spoke to him just before we came on air, and I asked him to respond to the president's denial that Michael Cohen's hush money constituted a campaign violation.
So I know I'm going to shock the people in the UK who know a little bit about our president. He got the law 100% wrong, the facts 100% wrong, and he doesn't care that he got either one wrong.
Well, have you got proof? Have you got proof that money came from his campaign and went into the hush funds going to the models to keep them quiet?
So, number one, it doesn't matter, so that's why he got the law wrong. Whether it came from his campaign or his personal checkbook, it is illegal to make a campaign contribution of $130,000, which is way above the limits, within reach of the election with the principal purpose of political effect. That's what the prosecutors found. That's what my client pled guilty to, as he was directed to do that by Mr. Trump, as the prosecutors found.
Let's move on to what your client knows in terms of, if you like, the bigger picture and the Russian collusion. Now, you've said he has knowledge about the computer crime of hacking and whether or not Trump knew ahead of time about hacking. That's a really serious part of the collusion charge. Now, what are you able to say now about what your client knows?
So I think you found about the right words that I used, and I have to be very careful because my client is going to be and will continue to be in conversation with the special counsel, Robert Mueller, who is investigating this very matter. So I can't reveal to you exactly what my client knows, but I gave a pretty good hint that my observation, my opinion, is that what he knows about Mr. Trump's knowledge of the computer crime called hacking, what my client knows should be of interest to Mr. Mueller. That's the exact wording that I used. I chose each word carefully, and that's about all I can say.
Can I ask you, do you know what your client knows? Do you know exactly what your client knows?
Yes.
Right. Do you happen to know whether your client visited Prague in 2016 and met with Russians there?
Thank you. Thank you. I told you I'm an Anglophile, and you asked me the question I wanted you to ask me. The answer is 100% no. Never has he ever been in Prague. And the 13 other references to my client in the so-called dossier are false.
Some people are saying the special counsel, Bob Mueller, doesn't really need to speak to your client or come to a deal with him. And I suppose it raises the question as to why they haven't come to a deal already. What's going on there?
Don't assume that he hasn't met with Mr. Mueller, but don't assume that he has. It's a topic I cannot comment on. I can tell you this. What he knows about Mr. Trump's behavior, including the issue of the hacking by a Russian government agency called WikiLeaks, and the notification of that hacking ahead of time, which any ordinary citizen would immediately say, a foreign government doing what? I'm calling in the police. There is a possibility that my client will help contribute to Mr. Mueller's inquiry about that subject.
Right. Look, last one. A lot of people are going to say, your client is a crook, definitely a crook. He's going to go to jail. Your client has lied consistently about all the things that Mueller or anyone wants to talk to him about. He's lied about the Stormy Daniels payments in the pretty recent past. Why on earth would anyone believe a word your client says?
It reminds me of the moment when I was on CNN playing a tape and Rudy Giuliani misstated what was on the tape. And I looked into the camera and I said, Mr. and Mrs. Trump America, don't believe me. I'm an anti-Trump Democrat. Believe your ears and listen to the tape. So don't believe Michael Cohen, my client. Simply look at what was written by the prosecutors, in which the prosecutors said, and my client repeated, the candidate, referring to Donald Trump, directed and coordinated the payment of this money illegally, because it's way above the limit, $130,000, for the principal purpose of affecting an election. That is a statement endorsed by the prosecutors. My client pled guilty, referring to Mr. Trump. Don't believe me. Don't believe Mr. Cohen. That is the prosecutor's findings of evidence. The only thing they did not do is indict and take to trial President Trump. And when he gets out of office, which I believe will be in about 2 years or less, he will then be subject to criminal prosecution.
Lanny Davis, you've been very clear. Much appreciated. Thank you. We should say the White House press spokeswoman said this evening that the president has done nothing wrong. There are no charges against him. There's been no collusion. Well, I'm joined now by Richard Painter from Minnesota. He was chief White House ethics officer under President George W. Bush and describes himself as a centrist Republican, although he's now running for office as a Democrat in his home state. And Jan Halper-Hayes joined me in the studio. She's the former vice president of Republicans abroad. Very good evening to you both. Richard Painter, can you just help us as to where we stand now? How much trouble is the president in on the Cohen election violation, do you think, first of all?
Well, it's certainly an awful mess to have the president's former lawyer and former campaign manager found guilty of felonies on the same day, multiple counts. The election violation it's a strong case. It's not an open-shut case. They tried a somewhat similar case against former Senator John Edwards of North Carolina, who had a very rich woman pay off a mistress of his, who was a campaign worker who also had become pregnant. And they were unable to get a jury conviction based on the facts there. But of course, in that one, the person given the payoff was too old to testify, and there were some other complications. So I don't know how this one would turn out at trial. It is a very, very difficult situation for the president in and of itself.
Would you be
I would
more
say it's
worried?
much worse than what President Clinton did.
Sorry to interrupt, but would you be more worried
Russia
for
thing
President
is real.
Trump? Would you be more worried about if you were advising the president, which you're not, would you be more worried about what Cohen knows about the Russia stuff?
Absolutely. And the advice I would give to the president would have been from the get-go not to tweet at all about the Russia investigation, not talk about it, not fire the FBI director, which he did, and engage in other conduct which is clearly obstruction of justice. His greatest exposure is an obstruction of justice charge because of the way he has handled the Russia investigation, instead of just letting it alone. I would say his second area of exposure, which we really do not know all the facts yet, is the actual collusion, whether the collusion was criminal collusion. There's definitely collusion, obviously, in the Trump Tower and the rest of it. Whether it was criminal collusion, whether the president is liable for criminal collusion or conspiracy has yet to be determined. But he's really dug his own grave on the obstruction of justice issue, because he has repeatedly tried to undermine the Russia investigation and taken concrete steps to do that, including firing the FBI director and trying to fire Robert Mueller.
Let me turn to Jan Halper-Hayes, because the attitude of the Republican Party, your soulmates, is so fascinating.
My soulmates.
Yeah, this is so fascinating, isn't it? So first of all, are you embarrassed that your president has hung out with so many crooks?
No, you know what? Every time anyone asks me if I'm embarrassed, they're not my friends. I don't hang out with them because...
They're your party, for goodness sake.
Well, all right, but you know what? don't let me start listing on the Democrat side the crooks that are there. I have a very realistic attitude. A lot of them are crooks. A lot of them cheat. A lot of them do different things. So let's just skip that side. And no, I'm not embarrassed.
Right. You're not embarrassed that he's lied about the payments to the porn star. We heard the two clips. He said, I knew nothing about it. Oh, I paid it myself out of my own account.
You know what? I don't know what to make of that, because when you listen to also the tape that Lanny referred to, is that they were talking about a payment and setting up a company. And that was the most that came out of that. But what Lanny left out was that the reason that Cont brought that forward was that Cont submitted an invoice for reimbursement in 2017 for legal services to get Trump to reimburse him because he used his own money to pay for it.
Right. He got a loan to pay Trump's hush money bill. Yeah. I mean, look.
Yeah, he was $14 million in debt.
Is there anything that for you would cross a line and say, OK, we Republicans have to be on the side of those against Trump. We have to impeach him. What is it for you that Trump does that, for example, gets a Senate by 2/3 to say, look, he has to go?
Look, if he really was involved in collusion, then
criminal collusion.
Collusion, then of course.
OK. And sacking Mueller if he tried to do something like that?
He's not going to sack Mueller. In fact, I think what's going to happen is as we get closer to the midterms, everyone's talking about the FISA application that the DOJ lied about. I bet he's going to release it unredacted, and that's going to expose a lot of things.
OK. Let's not go there. I just wondered if I can say to Richard Painter, do you worry for your country? Because I think your old party, the Republican Party, face this choice, don't they, of basically tolerating a president who has been hanging out with criminals and does quite a lot of embarrassing things, or denouncing him and, in a way, whipping up division and whipping up his base and making them feel that basically the establishment is out to get him. It's a terrible choice, isn't it, Richard Painter?
Well, yes, it is. This is the reason why I'm a former Republican. You know, the Democrats have their issues. I've dealt with corrupt people in the Democratic Party here in Minnesota and elsewhere as well. But this situation with Donald Trump is unparalleled in American history. I think this is far worse than the situation we had with President Richard Nixon. You know, who did obstruct justice, and they're involved in the Watergate break-in, but they didn't have the KGB involved with all that. I mean, this involves a foreign power that has been trying to undermine Western democracies for 100 years, since the communists took over in 1917. And they didn't get much traction in the United States until they discovered the far right of the Republican Party. And it's a very dangerous situation, and our president is obstructing justice. It is not only embarrassing,
Richard Painter,
it is putting our democracy at peril.
Richard Painter and Jan Helbez, thanks both very much indeed.